On today's episode, we learned that the only reason you take the fifth is because you did something wrong, that the deep state is really just our democracy, that theft is okay because it's in the Constitution, and finally, take a look at Republican flip-flopping on free markets. This is Cringe Posts. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of the Cringe Post podcast. This is the podcast where we gather the cringiest political and cultural takes that we see in our feeds each week. We assemble them all here, go through where they went wrong, and try to have a bit of fun along the way. I'm here with my co-host Donnie, and my name's Britt, and we are going to get started here in a second. But before we do that, please make sure to like, share, subscribe, DM us. We love to hear from you and love the interaction. And if you are listening to this podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcast, we have a visual show companion at cringepost.com where you can go and see all the different cringes that we're going through. Before we like to take on other people's posts, we like to poke fun at ourselves. And we have a post from my co-host Donnie here from the far reaches of his old Tumblr. And he writes, it's titled, Washington State's Marijuana Law. He writes, first of all, I'm a huge supporter of states' rights.
Already there. That sucks. That sucks right there.
You might as well put a but.
Yeah.
This, however, isn't enough for me to justify Washington passing a marijuana legalization bill. While I feel more often than not a sweeping federal law is better replaced by state laws, the drug scene is difficult. While proponents for legalizing drugs cite ending the drug war as a major plus, the problem with a solitary state legalizing one drug is that it barely affects the drug war and only allows mainline distribution of marijuana. A federal sweep would be a different issue, though I'm not sure I could support it completely either.
Why even make a point then, Donald? Why?
Might as well not have to, have freedom and liberty here in the United States because it's probably not going to happen all around the world. Like that's the only way it would make sense.
And even if it did happen everywhere, I'm not sure I could support that either.
Well, it's got to happen everywhere in the universe too, You're trying to this is a good sign because you're trying to square like your personal preference and philosophy with like your broader political philosophy.
Yeah.
You just hadn't fully figured it out yet, but it was keeping you awake at night. And so this was an attempt at you to try and make it all make sense.
Yeah, and it's frustrating because I remember sort of being on the fence about this, and I talked with a guy. I remember actually in 2014 or something. So 2 years after, this was 2012, or leading up to 2012 probably, because that's when the ballot initiative was initially to legalize it in Washington. And I remember in 2014, I was working on a political campaign for a local Republican guy, and I was talking with some other people who were in the scene, and one of them turned out to be a pretty staunch libertarian. And by this point, I was more libertarian than 2 years ago. And so I was like, oh, cool. And that guy was talking, and he's like, yeah, I didn't like the Washington state marijuana law either. And he goes, because it limited the number of dispensaries and it heavily taxed it. So you ended up with the worst of both worlds. And I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, that makes way more sense than any kind of opposition I had here, where I knew I didn't like it and I knew it was bad, but I couldn't put a finger on it. And I didn't like this. And the funny thing to me is it's like, marijuana legalization is not like the first step of ending the drug war and the cartels, because the cartels don't do a lot with marijuana necessarily. But what it does is it prevents like basic street violence and basic gang violence from having another product to distribute, which is just a good thing in general. And it also reduces the ability for people using this, which I don't like the drug, but it's a pretty mostly harmless drug, from getting prosecuted, put in jail, and serving for a crime that where no victim exists other than the self, if you want to view it that way. So there's a lot of benefits to this that I wasn't seeing, and it's just kind of funny how I stumbled my way through it. I also just want to say I'm a huge supporter of states' rights. I've kind of turned on that phrase. I still like the idea of federalism, as opposed to a big federal state, but I don't like the term states' rights because states don't have rights. Individuals have rights, not states. So
yeah,
that made me cringe a little bit.
Yeah, every argument that you would make against a federal entity, pushing power on the states, you can also make against states pushing power on counties and counties pushing,
right,
powers on cities.
Yeah.
So It's okay. You ended up in a good spot, man. It's nice. I get to see your journey to where you are today. So.
Yeah, exactly right.
It's a long way from the very first one we ever did, where you were happy that about the Lakewood. You wanted to charge the guy without any trial and throw him in jail.
Exactly, no trial for
straight to jail.
Well, straight to the grave.
Yeah, straight to the grave. Yeah. All right. Moving on to other people's cringe posts, we've got Daniel Goldman and Kyle Cheney. And Daniel Goldman is replying to Kyle Cheney. Kyle Cheney writes, Justin, Trump says he has pleaded the fifth in his deposition with the New York State AG. Quote, under the advice of my counsel, I decline to answer the questions under the rights and privileges afforded to every citizen under the United States Constitution, unquote. And then Daniel Goldman retweeted this, quote, retweeted, and he said, the Fifth Amendment ensures that people are not forced to incriminate themselves. But you don't take the fifth if you didn't do anything wrong. What, man? Like, this guy, like, contradicts himself. Like, his answer is right there. Like, within the very first sentence, it's like, yeah, like, you realize that the state is kind of malicious in some ways, even if it's unintentional, and that it wants to get a conviction. That's the job of the prosecutors, to get a conviction. And so they're going to do all these different things, and they're going to put you up there on the stand, and they want you to try and incriminate yourself. That's why any person that is ever, arrested or detained has said, hey, you probably shouldn't talk to any cops or any, detectives until you have a lawyer present, because they do not want you to, incriminate yourself, because you don't know the law. This crazy, complicated legal system that has been set up to benefit certain people has been made so crazy and so complicated that you could say the wrong thing and that can be used against you later. And so pleading the fifth is a way to ensure that doesn't happen. And it's pretty important in my opinion. That being said, part of me is very happy that Trump is having to do this, because if you remember, he kind of ragged on people for pleading the fifth before. And he's like, he himself said, don't plead the fifth unless you're guilty. So it's always a delicious thing when something, a right that a politician kind of harps on. And to be fair, again, he was harping on Hillary Clinton. So take it or leave it. But it is kind of just delicious to see him have to squirm like that under his own pretenses. But this Daniel Goldman guy, I guarantee you, if he had the same thing happen to him, he would probably plead the fifth as well, because that's just what any smart person does when the full force of the federal government, the most powerful entity that has ever existed in the history of mankind, comes against you.
Yeah, I saw this from Bad Legal Takes, Twitter account that just highlights these bad legal takes. And I was kind of shocked, because any lawyer who's successful in any capacity, whether or not you view this as a good thing, knows that the first thing you do is you have your client plead the fifth, because even from just a strategic standpoint, whether they're innocent or, whether they're guilty or not, but especially when you're innocent, you don't want your client speaking, because the state will take anything out of context. And like you said, that is their one job, is to take things and get that prosecution, get to have it pass through. So it's just such a funny idea to say that you only take it if you didn't do anything wrong. It's like, no. Taking the fifth is kind of the basic level assumption. When anything happens ever, everyone should take the fifth pretty much. And even if you are perfectly innocent, you should take the fifth and consult with someone who is well-versed in the horrible monstrosity that is the legal code, to make sure that when you're speaking, even if you're speaking to exonerate yourself, you're not saying anything that will incriminate you. So a great example is something as basic as if you get into a car accident, okay? And let's say that the other person is totally at fault, and you say, oh my gosh, I am so sorry, because their car got totaled. That can be used in court against you to put guilt onto you, because you're apologizing. Even if it's totally sincere thing that you're just apologizing because their car is totaled, it was their fault, but anything of you saying is treated as an admission of guilt. So you can be totally innocent and get in a situation where you incriminate yourself through no real fault except for speaking. And so now every time I got rear-ended by the city of Renton, nice. And I got out, and it was like, I was at a stoplight, they slammed into the back of me, 100% their fault, but I couldn't say anything at all. Basically, I had to be a robot, not interact with this person as a human, and just be like, all right, information, you called the police, okay, and it just felt so weird and just I don't know, but all that being said, I was completely not there's no metric by which I could be taken at fault. I'm completely still. They come in from behind me, slam into the back of my car, and yet I still have to essentially plead the fifth in this scenario and not say anything because I can get incriminated. So no, you don't take the fifth if you didn't do any. You don't take the fifth unless you do anything wrong or unless you do anything at all. You take the fifth always. That's just the rule. And
yeah,
so
you take the fifth if the state is involved. You take the fifth because they're going to try and do everything. Their goal is to win, right? And that's kind of the big joke about politicians. Is most politicians are lawyers, and lawyers aren't necessarily taught what is right or wrong. They're just taught how to win within the legal code. And so politicians just want to win. They don't care about you. So even more of an incentive, just say nothing, right? So you can actually game plan because their goal is to not find the right outcome. It's to find the outcome that wins for them.
The only other thing I'll say is that that cannot be the Kyle Cheney quote from Trump. That can't be a Trump quote. That sounds way too straightforward and normal to be a Trump quote. He would never say anything as straight-laced as "I decline to answer the questions under the rights and privileges afforded to every citizen." No, that's not Trump. He did not say that. There's no way.
His lawyers better make good money, man. That'd be a hard job. All right, we've got our next post from a Twitter user. We won't name them because they're not verified. But this fellow says, when the far right talk about the, quote, deep state, unquote, they are referring to democracy. This reminds me of a conversation I had with one of my buddies. And this was right during the Mueller investigation, and the Mueller report came out. And I was like, yeah, man, like there's a deep state for sure. And he's like, well, no, there's not. Like, what do you mean by that? And I was like, well, I just view that there are bureaucrats that exist within the government that are not elected and that have no, term limit and no limiting principle. You look at J. Edgar Hoover, the basically was able to stay within power for almost 40, 50 years, running things. That's what I mean by the deep state. They have interests that are not aligned with, maybe they might be or they might not be aligned with the general populace, but they are not accountable. They cannot be fired by the populace. And they remain when presidents and politicians come and go. And they might not have interests that are aligned with ours. And they probably can have a great deal of control over who actually, is the public face of these different things. And then I referred to specifically how, there's a list leaked when Obama was being confirmed as president. Basically like, hey, here are all the different people that are going to be part of your cabinet. And people kind of dismissed it as like, oh, this is conspiracy. And then, he went in, became president. And lo and behold, everyone on that list, that was given to him by these banks and these different agencies became part of his cabinet. And that's why you see, regardless of, whether it's George Bush in office or Donald Trump in office or Obama in office, you have people like John Bolton running around doing whatever they want in there. And that's, as Tom Woods says, no matter who you elect, you always somehow end up with John McCain. And it's not as much that it's just John McCain in there. It's just the people that make John McCain are the people that are actually in power.
Yeah, I think even with this critique, if you wanted to, it's hard to straw man this because if this was any semblance of rational or reasonable, you might think he could say something to the effect of, when the far right talk about the deep state, they are referring to our Republican form of government. And at least in that kind of critique, you would be saying that the aspects that they are criticizing are the institutions of expertise that we semi-elect to do a job that we don't understand. That's maybe the most promising kind of critique of what could be construed as the deep state in a good way, right? Because like the most positive idea of these bureaucrats and this sort of internal mechanism is it's like, well, they've been in the government longer than these politicians who cycle in every few years. So you would end up with people with no experience, or you'd end up with people who are elected because they're popular but have no expertise in things like the environment or, education or any number of things the government shouldn't have its hand in anyway. But so the argument would be like the quote unquote deep state they're complaining about are just bureaucrats who are experts doing what they should or what they know better than the people do. But that's not even what this tweet is. That would be a much better argument, and I still think a terrible one that I would say you already responded to and debunked, because like when you have like this revolving door of lobbyists of who's going to be appointed where, you realize it's just a power hungry mechanism to keep itself in control rather than to serve any actual good purpose. But that's not what this tweet is. This tweet is, it's democracy. And democracy is sort of the inverse word of racist, where it's just used in ways that to promote anything good that you like. So if you're against democracy, you're a bad person, because no matter what the context is, democracy is good. Democracy is righteous. Democracy is good. Like, how is the deep state being referred to here democratic in any way, shape, or form? It's not. The deep state that they hate, they're saying, are the people who were not elected, who controlled the swamp behind Donald Trump. So if anything, democracy is the enemy of the deep state. But that's a little too more, too rational for this tweet.
Yeah. It's always funny, like, the same people that will, like, if I was to steelman it, I'd say, well, he when he means democracy, he doesn't mean like, 51% of people get to rule the other 49. He really means like, our democratic republic and Western civilization or something like that, right? Because that's kind of like what's portrayed in culture. Like you have episode 3 of Star Wars, and my loyalty is to the Republic, to democracy, and it's really, Obi-Wan Kenobi's really saying like, oh, these Western values, right? Of like individualism and stuff like that. But these people don't. I guarantee you, this guy doesn't even really like that, right? Like, he would criticize the West, he criticized Western values and the things that Western values props up. So it's really logically incoherent. They just know these word salads that they throw out there because it sounds right. And it's like, well, democracy is something that all the people in the movies and in the publications write about and say, and it's a good thing. So anything that is against what I like, and what I like is obviously good, is anti-democracy. And it's just disingenuous at its best, and it's malicious at its worst.
Yeah, it's a big grandstand without saying much of anything. It's really easy. I mean, let's think. You could think of an equitable comparison right now, with to say like when the far left talk about diversity, they're actually talking about racism. Like, that's the exact same kind of like level of critique, except mine actually is a little bit more coherent, because you can make an argument that links their diversity things into racist policies. But like, if I tweeted that, would I really be saying anything of value? No, that's not like me tweeting that does nothing valuable except give people who agree with me click like that. It's a useless thing to say. It's not insightful. It's not deep.
On autopilot.
Doesn't make sense. Yeah, exactly. Autopilot tweet.
Moving on to our next one. We've got Dan Smots, great. I think he's pretty good in Liberty Twitter. And he writes, taxation is totally not theft, ... He's being sarcastic. But the IRS will totally kill you if you don't pay them. And he was linking to an article and a screenshot of, it was a job description for the 87,000 new IRS agents, which basically said, hey, part of the requirements for this job is that you have to be comfortable using deadly force and wielding a weapon in some cases. Obviously inferring that these 87,000 IRS agents might eventually have to use their weapon on people who are not paying taxes or trying to evade taxes. And then this brilliant person replies, quote, retweets him, for the record, taxation is not, quote, theft, unquote. Taxation is necessary for the proper function of government, parentheses, when government is fiscally responsible and completely constitutional. Reference Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution. I didn't realize it's like me coming to you, Donnie, and saying, hey, I wrote this little line on this paper that says every time you work and you make any money, you got to buy me an Xbox. I wrote it on here, and I at the top I put a header that says Constitution on it. That means you must pay me. Don't you agree? Like, no, you don't get you, and no, you can't opt out of it. Like, because I'm giving you this paper, now you're forced to buy me an Xbox every single time you go to work. I'll let you address the more not the low hanging fruit, but the obvious, like, oh, when government is responsible. But it's just like this weird, this guy he's got American flags in his profile thing. So maybe he's kind of one of those really conservative, but like big government conservatives that believes it's like, oh, like the Constitution protects us and we venerate this document. It's like, no, like we don't venerate the document. We venerate what it says when it's right, right? Like that. And that's the whole point of, the founding fathers wrote, we view these truths to be self-evident, right? It's like, regardless of whether they're on the Constitution or in the Declaration of Independence or in the Bill of Rights or written anywhere or passed by executive order, like whatever stuff you say, the rights that we see here are self-evident, given to us by God. And so what matters is not what is in the Constitution, but what we can actually logically, reasonably, and morally back up. And I don't think you can back up having to pay money to some entity that is outside of yourself that you never agreed to pay at the end of a gun. That is theft. In any other context, that is theft.
When you're talking about the sort of self-imposed authority of a piece of paper, it makes me think of almost the inverse of that from Parks and Rec when the guy asks Ron Swanson, do you have your permit for that? And he's like, yeah, I've got my permit right here. And he hands him this piece of paper. It just says, I do what I want, or I do whatever I want, something and it's kind of like that where from their perspective that's ridiculous. Of course, that's not a permit. And it's like, okay, so why is the Constitution that no one else agreed to really? But yeah, I mean, of course, the fatal conceit is that parentheses there that you highlighted, the when government is fiscally responsible. That's just not the case, really. And the only thing that makes a government, or the only thing that makes people fiscally responsible is having to contend with reality. Because the truth is, most people don't operate with fiscal responsibility unless they have to. Most people don't want to draw up a budget, but then when they live from their paychecks and they realize, I have to save up for a house if I want to buy a house, or I have to save up because we're going to have kids. Like they draw these things up out of necessity. And the problem is that government, by its design, is not met with that reality because its revenue source is not attached to anything except for its citizens, where it takes the funding through means of force. So there's no urgency for the government to face and contend with financial realities to be fiscally responsible. It's kind of an oxymoronic claim to say that a government can be fiscally responsible. The best examples of fiscally responsible, acts that government do is returning taxpayers their taxes, which is really funny when this person's entire argument is that taxation is necessary for a fiscally responsible government. I just don't think that and those cases are by far the exception, not the rule. So fiscally responsible government is an oxymoron. And by design, even if you start with a quote unquote fiscally responsible government, the way that that government's set up and power operates, it never stays that way. And I think the U.S. is proof of that.
Yeah, and let's even grant this guy's premise. You and I both agree that the government, by definition, will never be fiscally responsible. But let's just grant it, like, taxation is okay when the government is fiscally responsible. Well, the last time the United States was fiscally responsible, didn't actually have any debt. I think it was like around 1830 or 1835 or something like that. It was a long time ago, almost 200 years ago was the last time. And by the way, at that time, we didn't have the income tax and we had very little taxation at all. It's almost like the more money you give to the government, the more fiscally responsible irresponsible it becomes. It's kind of like you can't be fiscally irresponsible if you don't have any money, right? And that's how the government works, is just don't give them any money and they won't be fiscally irresponsible, or they will be fiscally responsible because they won't have any money to spend. And people just kind of ignore that. Like we are taught and kind of indoctrinated that, well, income tax is the price we pay to live in society. But it's like the income tax is a pretty new thing in the United States. It didn't exist until 1913 or whatever, or 1909 or whatever it was. So somehow we managed to get to over 130 years without it. So why do we need it now? And it's like, it's because we want to have a world empire, and there are people that are power hungry that are like, well, I can basically create no value, but if I win a popularity contest, I get access to all, a percentage, 30% of everyone's income in the United States.
The other funny thing is just like the phrasing of it, which I know we went over a little bit, but it just still strikes me that, for the record, taxation is not theft. It's necessary for the proper function of government. again, that presumes the necessity of government. It
Yeah.
presumes that anything done for this magical entity that's the government makes it justified. I'm kind of scared to ask this man that, if prima nocta was written into the Constitution, would that be okay? Because it's, it's the government said it. So, because, what's the difference between, prima nocta and rape? Well, there really is none. It's the key difference between sex and rape is consent. So why is there not this distinction made between taxation and theft? Because the difference between voluntarily giving money or exchanging goods and services voluntarily and being stolen from is consent. Taxation has no consent in it, but this guy seems to make the argument that if it's for the government, for some reason, that's just the assumption, because it's necessary for the proper function of government. So if something is in service of the government, then consent is not necessary. So don't want to know this guy's views on prima nocta, because frankly, it sounds to me like the government can do things without consent as long as it's within quote unquote reason, which, is of course trademarked by the wise people who get to control it.
Yeah, and that kind of brings us back to the self-evident thing, right? Like if you give the example of prima nocta to this guy, he'd be like, "Oh, of course, like that's rape, or at the very minimum, like that's a really violent, ugly, wrong thing to do." And he's like, "That's just obvious." It's like, okay, well, why is it obvious? What is the logic behind it being obvious? Oh, it's because no consent exists. Now apply that to taxation, and now you're logically consistent, and you should be able to sleep at night.
Yep, exactly right.
Moving on to our next one, we've got two tweets. One from Florida House Congressman Anthony Sabatini. And he writes, and this is in response to the FBI raiding Trump's Mar-a-Lago hotel resort thing. And he writes, "It's time for us in the Florida legislature to call an emergency legislative session and amend our laws regarding federal agencies. Sever all ties with the DOJ immediately. Any FBI agent conducting law enforcement functions outside the purview of our state should be arrested upon sight." Man, you're just a couple hundred years late on this, but it's okay. Like, good. That's great. That's actually pretty based and awesome.
Yes. Yeah.
And then this other person replies, "It wasn't a raid. It was just tourists wanting to see the property, kind of like what happened at the Capitol." Obviously referring to January 6th. I don't know, man. We've talked about this a lot. I get a little bit tired of having to talk about it, but like January 6th, the only person that died due to violence, January 6th, was one of the people that went there by a federal agent. So yeah, and they were also invited in. There's camera evidence. People are shocked to know this, and when I show them the video, they're shocked. There's on camera, police officers and federal agents welcoming in these people into the Capitol. I don't know what else you call that. I mean, I guess tourist is kind of a hyperbolic way to put it, but it's like, in any other instance, when the government opens up its doors and lets you walk through the halls and invites you in, and you're not from there, it kind of is tourism, right? I'm not saying that they are, but like, there's a big difference between a bunch of people being invited into the Capitol, and yes, there is violence and stuff like that, but it's a lot different than the FBI, being used as a tool by the existing regime to go raid a political opponent. It's apples and oranges in a lot of way, but the significance is like obviously a lot worse. It's like you have literally weaponized the Department of Justice, and I obviously we'll see what all comes out of it. But like you've weaponized it against a political opponent. And what's great about this, right, is it's waking up all these conservatives. Like you see this Florida guy, it's like, wow, my gosh, maybe we shouldn't let the federal government have any power at all in our state. It's like, yes, that's really good. Like go the way of Missouri, where they basically effectively have guaranteed that they will have constitutional carry in their state because any gun laws executed at the federal level will not be supported by local law enforcement. Like that's really awesome, and that's how states are supposed to function. Donnie from 2012 would be very happy about those states' rights. Yeah, so that's kind of the white pill about all this. Is people are waking up to like, oh yeah, we really don't like the FBI, we really don't like the feds, and oh my gosh, like when the wrong person's in power, like maybe we don't want to have the feds coming into our state, and maybe we shouldn't have that at all. So that's good news, at least.
Yeah, I think the whole setting for this to trigger the right to now be making these claims, I think it's disappointing that it has to be, Donald
Trump.
Trump as the impetus. But I guess, per our last episode, he is of course the greatest thing for the universe and all citizens everywhere. Second only to Jesus Christ. But no, it's frustrating because there are so many worse atrocities committed. Now, as it stands, we don't know what exactly the FBI, was searching. That the details are kind of rolling out now. It could turn out that from a legal standpoint, they had proper authority to do this, and it could have gone through all the right checks and whatever. But to think that it's not politically aimed at the very bottom level, it's like, yeah, Donald Trump could have something in there that they need and have, again, all the right certifications for, and they're justified. But why is the raid happening to him at Mar-a-Lago and none of this has happened to anyone involved in the Epstein case? Right? Like, how are your priorities so whack that's, so at the very least, even though it's disappointing that this is the thing that's triggering it, it's great to see it regardless, because there is obvious political motivation one way or the other. And then this stupid response is just so lowbrow and dumb.
Yeah.
It's like these people have this narrative in their head that the January 6th thing is such a travesty and such a crime that anyone who calls it out for being silly just is just equating what happened there to like tourists visiting, and if we compare these, then we've made an equal comparison. And it's like, no, what we've always said is that the January 6th thing was stupid. That it was stupid and it was reckless, but it was, like you said, they were invited in. There was property destruction and dumb, but to even remotely compare this disorganized, disheveled group of angry everyday people who drove in and flew in from all over the country and were very likely riled by feds, by the way, because based on who they've brought in and who they haven't brought in and how people on the streets were booing the people who were calling them to charge in and stuff like that, So it's very sketchy there. I don't know that it was actually a fed op, but very likely it seems like that could be a very
for it though, right?
Yeah,
like Bill Clinton had people like that rile rioters up,
and the Whitmer example and all that sort of thing. Anyway, so it's like to compare these everyday people to the FBI, the most armed and powerful entity in the country, targeting a political opponent, is just they're just so different and just so far removed from each other. But with one simple trick, this person's able to put them on the same level without any cognitive dissonance. It's like, look, I don't like the Bernie Sanders populist ideas. I don't like the Bernie bro ideology. But like, if I'm trying to think that, oh man, the Bernie bro, like, I don't know, Bernie bro rally is the exact same thing as like a government parade celebrating Biden or something like that. Like to think those would be the same thing would be absolutely ludicrous, because at least the Bernie bro things, they're real people, they're populist, it's a groundswell of actual humans. And anything the government does, like these ceremonies, and like even something like the State of the Union, where it's this big hallowed event where everyone listens to the president address and it's this gala of sorts, like that to me is just creepier than like a Bernie Sanders rally. And they're not equal, because the Bernie Sanders rally is full of terrible ideas, but it's real people, and any sort of official government agency event is full of empty suits and creeps. So I don't know, just at that base level, comparing like a populist uprising, even if in your opinion it was violent and dangerous, even if you think that, to compare it at all to a targeted government assault from these goons, it's whack to me.
Yeah. I like your point about, like, man, it took so long for these conservatives to actually like realize that the feds are evil. I mean, thankfully they are right now, but it made me think about, like, man, like why wasn't the Idaho legislature talking about, getting the feds out of there after Ruby Ridge, right? So many years ago. Why wasn't Texas talking about, with Waco, when the feds literally burned women and children alive in a building? All these instances and all this evil, and it's like it really had to be Donald Trump, this elite from Manhattan being raided, like, for you to realize that, like, this is this is a big problem and we probably shouldn't have these alphabet agencies have, godlike powers in our state. So that's pretty disappointing. I'm happy that it's happening, obviously, but hopefully this kind of this becomes precedent to think of the feds through this lens, from now on.
Absolutely.
All right, moving on to our last one. We have got Joe Kent. He is a Republican candidate for Washington District 3 here in our state. And he's got two tweets. The first one writes, Republicans will talk a big game until the oligarchs say, quote, but the free market. Ours then mumble some Reagan quote and go back to complaining. If we want to win, we will have to use government to choose winners and losers. The government already does. We are just the losers every time. Sounds like a Sith Lord. And then he follows it up. Was this after or before his other tweet?
I don't remember. I just had an aggregate of bad quotes from him. So
okay, yeah. Nice. So whether this is before or after, it's interesting. He writes, more woke theater. This isn't a race issue. It's about the globalist assault on our working class. The globalist free market worshipers have gutted our manufacturing jobs and are now allowing a hedge fund to buy up housing with help from the Fed. And this is in response to Attorney General Merrick Garland talking about, how a white family is 30% more likely to own a home than a black family, and we need to close the income gap and the home ownership gap and all this stuff. And I think this is like a really nice representation of like the cognitive dissonance of Republicans' stance on like free markets and trade and tariffs and all this stuff, because they're very like free market until it becomes like you want to be free market and trade with people, on the other side of the country, right? If I want to get something made in China, or if I want to, figure out how specialization works to provide a cheaper product here in the United States, then it's not very good, and we need to oppose that. And what this kind of represents to me is, I don't know Joe Kent very well. Obviously, you know him a little bit better than me, and you don't really like him, so I assume he's not very awesome. But it's very much like he kind of like picks up on all these very populist things that are easy to talk about, and so then he puts it out there, and then once you realize that these don't really actually match up, it's like, oh, like this guy is kind of an empty brain bucket. He just knows how to assemble different things. It's kind of like the Facebook AI bot. You enter stuff in, it just takes an aggregate of the internet and spits out what most people are saying. That's kind of what this guy's doing right here.
Yeah, it's frustrating because, I think Joe Kent is a bright dude in the sense that he's not like he's not like Jay Inslee, our governor, okay?
Sure.
Our governor is someone who is claiming that, a tax on carbon isn't going to increase the cost of gas. Like that is just like you are willfully ignorant or just completely malicious to say something that stupid. Joe Kent, I think, is either in this case calculating in the sense that he is appealing to that base, that Trumpian base, and probably feels both of these things too to some degree. But I think he's harping on each of these points in extreme measures to get the most excitement and energy out of the base that he now. For context, he just edged out the sitting Congresswoman Jamie Herrera Butler, I believe could be pronounced differently, but who was one of the few Republicans to vote yes on impeachment for Trump. So he beat her in Washington State. We have a top two primary. So the Democrat had all the Democrat votes consolidated. So that person got the top two. And Joe Kent edged out the sitting representative and will be running for this. Now, whether or not he wins, we'll see. It's kind of it leans Republican district, but Washington's really hate Trumpians. So, but the thing that he did right is that he energized his base. And that's what I see these tweets as doing. But when you go in these extreme hyperbolic directions, it does prove this absolute cognitive dissonance. And frankly, I don't know enough to say for sure, but I think he might hold both of these things to be true. But it is just an inherent contradiction to think that the government is actively picking winners and losers, but then it's also the fault of the free market cult or free market worshipers. I think he refers to them as free market cult in other places. And it's and so it's really funny because these people, both on the right and the left, just they act as though the establishment Republicans are pro-free market, which is just so not the case. Like, when I think Mitch McConnell, I don't think Ludwig von Mises, those aren't two names that are floating around at the same time in my head. And so this populist right and the left treat the establishment Republicans as though they have any semblance of free market policies because they quote someone like Reagan, who himself was not that free market. No. And so it's frustrating because then the populist right blames the free market on all of the problems that the government establishment has created. And so when he says, the government already picks winners and losers, we're just the losers every time, he's actually right about that. The difference is we're always going to be the losers when government picks winners and losers, because the only winners in that scenario is the government. The government rewards itself and its cronies, lobbyists. So big corporations and big government always wins. And even if you take control, Joe Kent, those are always going to remain the victors, unless the only way to do it is to disestablish the government in a major kind of way and take away its power. You can't have a government that picks winners lose. But all that to say, the contradiction of the globalist free market worshippers are at fault for these things, but also the government's picking winners and losers. It's just a contradiction in terms, because if the government's picking winners and losers, then you do not have a free market, full stop.
Yeah, and what's difficult about like his second tweet that we read about the globalists and the free market and like, oh, we need to bring manufacturing back here and all this stuff. It's like I agree in that I think there are globalists who very much want to have one world government and to be able to control, people in Europe can control what's going on in the United States and vice versa. And that you've got, some world council that manages all world affairs, and we've got one world government. There are definitely people like that. I think a lot of people that are in government in all countries kind of think that way, just by evidence of the fact that they decided to spend their lives trying to get into positions of power to rule over other people. But you shouldn't conflate that with like people in the United States trading with normal people in China or Taiwan or in India or any of these other places. Like, that's a really good thing. The fact that, people that specialize and can do jobs really well, or that like are still like in their industrial revolution and trying to get up and out of it, they now have a motivated workforce and they're modernizing. It's like, we should take advantage of that. Like, it's a good thing for people to trade. The only way that wealth builds for anyone, even if it's just for us or just for them or overall, is when people are able to trade back and forth, because you're just constantly creating more and more productivity by focusing on one thing. And so you hear a lot of these conservatives will talk about things like, well, no, we need to bring manufacturing jobs back here. We need to put a 30% tariff on cars or on whatever. It's like, no, I actually like having cheap cars. I like having a cheap car and being able to purchase a cheap car. And, the folks in Japan and China, like, they like having us buy their cheap cars from them. Like, what's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that. And I get it. There are people that used to make cars in the United States that are a little bit upset about that. But, we didn't, this is your example. It's like the people that benefited the most from, plumbing being invented were not rich people. It was the normal, average, everyday poor person that no longer had to throw their waste out their window or go use, the outhouse behind their house, and that was smelly and dirty and gross. And so it's like, yeah, like, we want to be able to trade. Normal people want to be able to trade. I want to be able to get things that I normally wouldn't be able to get because I don't either have the expertise or I don't have the resources here. There's a reason why avocados are available year-round here in the United States when they're seasonal. Like, whether I'm in Washington, avocados don't really grow up here very well. They sure as heck don't grow up here in December, but I can go to a Safeway and I can grab them. And that's because we have free trade with different types of places and different types of people. And if you make it harder for those goods to move across our borders, it's going to just be harder for people to actually gain wealth and for everyone to be happy. Just let people do what they want to do.
Well, yeah, and in his example that he gives, where he's, free market worshipers have gutted our manufacturing and are now allowing hedge funds to buy up housing with help from the Fed. I mean, that's such a funny term right there to say free market worshipers, blah, 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 allowing hedge funds to buy up housing with help from the Fed.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe that's the problem, Joe. Maybe that's the issue, where it's not a free market because they're getting propped up from the Fed. And I mean, you think about the housing bubble and the market crash and all these places that were bailed out by the government. Guess what? If we allowed all these hedge funds, let's say that the government was not propping up any of this, they were not restricting housing with zoning laws. Let's pretend for a second in Joe Kent's fantasy land that he lives in that we are in a free market when it comes to housing and things like that, okay? Let's pretend that's where we are. And let's pretend, because Joe Kent loves to pretend, let's pretend that the government isn't propping up these hedge funds to buy up land and stuff like that, okay? Then guess what happens? We have a housing crash. We have the bubble bursting. And guess what? All these hedge funds lose massively. They lose and they lose and they have to sell. And guess what? The market corrects itself then. And then people are able to buy these things again. And guess what? In a functioning economy, if a hedge fund buys up all this land, they want to use it, they have to actually provide it for useful services and value. It has to actually provide something that meets a need so that it's generating profit and revenue. And that's how a free market operates. Not in the free market is not when you allow these government or these big businesses to buy up land with taxpayer money and then bail them out when the value drops because they're too big to fail. That's not a free market, Joe.
Yes.
That's the government action. That's the government picking winners and losers, which you are rightfully concerned about. But the problem is that when you're in control, you don't get to pick the winners and losers either, because that's not how the free market operates. And that's not, it's not how a controlled economy never works. Even if you think you're the good guy, the controlled economy never works.
Yeah, it reminds me of, I watched The Big Short. You've seen The Big Short, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think maybe I've told you about this, but I watched it in college with one of my buddies, and he leans kind of more lefty in a lot of ways. And we watched it. I was like, wow, this is such an amazing explanation of the 2008 financial crisis and how it all went in. And there's this scene in there where there's some hedge fund manager, and one of the protagonists is like, hey, like aren't you worried? You're doing all these different financial tricks. Like, aren't you worried this is going to crash and bite you in the butt? And the hedge fund manager's like, oh yeah, it will happen, but like, we've got all these ties with the government and they'll bail us out. It'll be fine. And so then obviously everything happens. People lose their houses, all the bad stuff, and stocks go and people commit suicide and all this stuff. And then the United States government bails these banks out, right? That made all these bad decisions. And so we get to the end of this movie and I'm like, man, like, that's just terrible, like that we're doing that. And my buddy goes, he's like, yeah, but that's just capitalism for you. And I was like, do we watch the same movie? Like yes, the hedge fund managers are the villains, and yes, they got away with it. But how did they get away with it? They got away with it because the government said, oh yeah, we're going to choose you to be the winner and to get away with it. And so it's like, that's not capitalism. That's crony capitalism. That's socialism for corporations. And so I just wish people, the left and a lot of people have done a really good job of taking words and twisting their meaning and saying that capitalism is any scenario where an unfair, perceived unfair outcome occurs, right? Or unjust outcome occurs. It's like, no, that's not capitalism. There's the CEO of Whole Foods, John Mackey, has a book called Conscious Capitalism, and he really does a good job laying out. It's like, no, that capitalism is just voluntary exchange. And yes, like sometimes that can be done bad, but the only way that you actually grow and become a winner in capitalism is by providing valuable services for people. It's a great book. Everyone should read it. And so I just hope, Joe Kent, I obviously don't know him very well. And my perception of him is from these two tweets of holding very contradictory positions, and it doesn't seem very logical. But I hope that if he wins, that he decides to become a little bit more consistent, or at least read a few things, and I hopefully being philosophically consistent keeps him up at night and forces him to be so.
Right, and frankly, people like this, I think at the very root, even though they have these contradictions, I think there's hope for them to change their mind a lot more than some people who are a little bit more in the brain rot of I don't know, progressivism, as it seems. Because at the very least, he's speaking out against some things like letting government control our children's education and stuff like that. So at the root cause, to be frank, if you have a top two primary, you only have two people to vote for, and it's this guy or the very progressive, I probably vote Joe Kent, because either way, you're getting someone who hates the free market. You might as well get the guy who hates the free market but doesn't want your kids taught sexual acts in third grade, But But I do think that even in this populist movement, there is room for an expansion and understanding of this kind of thing, because they get, at the end of the day, most of the time, that government shouldn't control your kids, shouldn't control your family, shouldn't control you. So then they just need to be brought to, you shouldn't control the government because the government shouldn't be in control of anything.
Totally agree. Awesome. Well, folks, thanks for hanging out with us during the show. We've had a great time. And if we said anything that made you cringe, be sure to let us know. Like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And we will catch you on the next one.